Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to see everybody here back into our Fashion Business Executive Roundtable that we host once a month. We do it every Tuesday of the month at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard. I'm sorry, 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I really appreciate for everyone who's live with us here on the call to keep this conversation interactive, as well as anyone who is listening in. Please feel free to drop your comments. We will see them and we'll be able to also provide some information that way and answers. And if not, we will follow up back. Otherwise, I'd love to just really take the time and be one more time to express my gratitude for everyone who've supported us this year. We've done this for consecutively for 12 months, and we're going to continue doing it next year. So hopefully this keeps driving value to every single one of you guys and for your businesses. And I really want to think about and talk about what our today topic is going to be. And we're going to be covering the success in 2026 as we're setting up and building our smarter goals, KPIs, thinking about more resilient fashion brands through how we build it through data, agility, and process excellence. So we'll be covering quite a few interesting topics today. We're going to talk about the data-driven growth goals. We're going to be talking about the KPI-driven process optimizations and the proactive adaptation to the market shifts within our industry. This is really catered to founders, to executives of fashion and retail brands. So if you are already emerging, or if you're an emerging brand, or if you're already established brand, this is for you. And it's going to come, we're going to cover very much in depth all of our topics today with great discussions. So stay tuned. We're very excited for you guys to be here. Just to quickly, so I'd love to introduce myself to people who do not know me and who are new on our call today. And of course, please, I'd love to welcome back everyone who's been repetitively coming back and sharing your insights in this roundtables. We can be as only strong as this community grows. So that's the whole purpose of why we're doing this. But my name is Evgenia Alexandrovna Yushkova, or simply Yay, and I'm a fashion business consultant and a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. And I have spent nearly 2 decades building and scaling fashion and retail brands from inside out across manufacturing, private label, buying, merchandising, and end-to-end operational transformations. I have launched and led over dozens of multi-million-dollar private label brands for large retailers, redesigned processes for retailers and manufacturers with revenue in hundreds of millions of dollars and improving margins by over 20-30% through operational excellence and as well as through product margin upscales. Thinking about how to build smarter assortment and strategies, as well as how to tie it in back into process optimizations. And everything I'll share today comes directly from real work inside of real organizations. We do have a boutique business of the catering to fashion brands and helping them grow and really identifying the profit leaks and helping them at the bottom line how to maximize their profitability. We're going to talk about what's really working, what's really not potentially working that we see often across a lot of our clients. And what will really matter most is how to move forward differently now that we are in preparation for the 2026 and setting up our goals. Success in next year really won't be to the people that are not prepared, right? It's really going to go forward towards the brands who are preparing ahead of times and thinking about it strategically. It belongs to really the leaders who can act now, teams who can build agility into their operations, treat data like it's assets, and are willing to redesign processes that no longer support their goals. And if ever felt like your brand is moving, but not necessarily moving forward, if you ever really felt that no matter how much you put it into work, there's still not a really significant push or significant way that you have progressed, then you're really maybe pushing the wrong KPIs, or maybe you're really scratching them on the surface and not tying them into how that actually affects the process and how that should be changed as well along the way as you're focusing on certain KPIs. So if you're feeling this, you're not alone. This is absolutely normal for our industry. We're all going at 100 miles an hour. We often, by doing that, tend to treat symptoms instead of actually addressing the root causes. And this is why our conversation of today's topic was so important to thinking about how do we set our KPIs for next year, but really tying them back to optimization of our end-to-end process. Because at the end of the day, all of it is tied together and helps us to drive speed, agility, and profitability at the bottom line. So I'm super excited to dive in. We got a little bit of a quick introduction to some of the people on the call. JT and Maggie, I didn't get a chance to let you guys introduce yourself. If you guys don't mind, really quickly, just say hello to everyone and let us know what you guys are working on, and then we'll dive right into our discussion of the first topic about thinking about setting the data-driven growth for goals. But JT, do you want to just quickly let us know a little bit about where you're calling us from and what you do?
Yes, I'm calling in listening in from NYC. My camera's off because I look a little crazy right now because I have to as soon as this is over, I have to get ready for a panel at Columbia. So I look a little crazy. Forgive me for being off camera. But of course, I'm right here in New York. Right now, I'm doing a lot of advisory work, especially and a lot of speaking. People like to say that I'm anti-AI. I am not anti-AI. I am pro-creativity and pro-project management. I am a project manager through and through. It runs through my blood. It's probably what I was born to do. And I've accepted that and I embrace it. But I have over 10 years of being a project manager and working in fashion from every aspect. There's probably not anything I haven't done as it pertains to fashion and apparel. And right now, I'm currently an advisor for a young SaaS startup that's called Utengen, which is hopefully going to change the way we source sustainable materials.
Mm-hmm.
And also, right now, I'm speaking anywhere that people hear me talk about how fashion and textiles and project management and the role it's going to be playing as far as digital innovation, as far as digital innovation goes. So if you need an advisor or if you need someone that can tell you like, hey, let's try to work out our hard spots, I am your girl. Please reach out. I am here and I would love to connect with all of you because I definitely feel that there's some synergies amongst everyone here. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, JT. Look forward to hearing a lot of your insights as we're starting to have this conversation. Maggie, do you want to quickly introduce yourself as well to the group? Maggie, can you hear us? All right, we're going to give her a few more minutes to just hopefully she'll be able to hear us, or let me know in the text in the message if you're having technical difficulties. But let's start with really thinking about the growth goals, right? Because this is where most fashion brands quietly sabotage themselves. And the default way of really thinking about the goal settings is, hey, what was we've done last year, right? If we've done last year X, this year we want to do X plus usually 10 to 20%. And really this becomes an intuition base, not a database decision. And how many of you guys who are live right now with us in the call actually had that experience, whether you worked in companies before, you maybe have your own company where you guys are looking at last year numbers and just hoping to be able to increase it by a certain percentage without really diving into specific data-driven decisions in terms of where exactly do you want to be able to reduce or increase in order for you to be able to get to maximum profitability while you're delivering that 10 to 20% growth. Paul, I know you had a plethora of experience even prior to having your own business. So, I mean, have you ever kind of felt like that sometimes goals are set more on an intuition versus really database?
100%. So, since most people here don't know me or my background, before working on Patchwork, I was a finance and data person for Silicon Valley tech companies. And especially early on, and even later, these companies tend to not have much of a focus on what their goals are or what the metrics are to keep them focused on those goals. And both of those are distinct problems that are related because they keep you on the right path. They keep you going to where you want to go, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so clarity on objectives is essential. And also clarity on the actual metrics that measure your progress towards those objectives is also essential, and they work together. And so those problems, from my experience, when companies have them or they're not doing them well, come from one of two places. One is that the goal itself, the essential, like one or two or maybe three things that are going to drive the business forward are not clear to the founders. That's one. Or two, they are clear, but their data people just drown them in metrics. And pretty soon they're looking at like 10,000 different things, and it's not clear how actually am I measuring my progress towards what I want to achieve. So 100% agree that that's an essential topic.
Absolutely. And we really need the goals that are anchored in real demand, right? Actual profitability and operational capacities. So when we think about those goals and that are not potentially grounded in data, here's what some of the things that really happen behind the scenes that we often see around from some of our clients. And I'm curious to see if you guys are experiencing or have experienced similar things. One of the things is over ordering the assortments. I think that's one of the biggest things that we often see, where you end up really planning growth across the board, right? Instead of their demand in real time in the real categories. Buyers widen the assortment when you're just doing it by 10, if I want to increase by 10 to 20%, they tend to widen the assortments across everything. And planning and designing teams chase too many ideas that way. And suddenly you're sitting on a, access inventory that ties up the cash. And why did that happen? Is because we were too generic when we said, hey, we want to grow 10 to 20% X, instead of actually diving into depth of figuring out which categories potentially we want to actually focus on that brings us the most and most investment return on our investment, right? Thinking about also wrong categories to invest in. The categories that feel exciting, usually the ones that get funded, right? If you are not a data-driven company who actually sets goals based on understanding which categories drives the most profitability for you. While the quiet, really the work horse kind of the categories that are not as sexy, that are not as appealing, that are constantly deliver margin are often get neglected in this type of a model. You grow the wrong part of the business and wonder why the profitability isn't moving. And we often see where clients come to us with the same exact problem. And when we start trying to identify how did this happen, we realize that they're looking at much broader and their goals are much broader instead of actually being more specific. And we'll talk about in a little bit, in a few minutes, how to set up some of those goals more specifically so that you can take those into account. Inventory that drains cash flow is another big hurdle that we see often that happens if the goals are not set up correctly, where you can grow your top line revenue but still be cash poor on the inventory if it's not turning correctly. And this is where, for example, Paul and Patchwork is bringing a fantastic solution where they are able to bring in and offer agile manufacturing and supply chain to where people are actually able to not place bulk orders, right? Where they can actually test and chase quickly the proven styles, which helps them to really overall increase their bottom line profitability. And Paul, I don't want to speak for you, but I think this is really going to be a great topic where you can also insert how you've seen some of the successes and people who actually identified that is what their focus is of 2025 and how they're actually able to achieve that through switching to agile manufacturing like you guys are doing.
Wonderful. So yeah, so this is something that I don't know that apparel founders always realize how much of a drag on their business it is, because it's just so common in the industry that people almost don't even think about it anymore. And I don't know if you guys know this, but most fashion brands have more than 50% of all their cash, all their capital just in inventory. So all the capital that the brand has, or not all of it, but a majority of it, is stuck in the form of inventory sitting in a warehouse or on a boat somewhere, right? And that means that you can't invest or reinvest in your business as much as you might want. It might also mean that you have to go out into the equity markets and raise capital and dilute yourself because you need capital and you don't have it, right? So in our model, our brands don't invest, let's say 6 months worth of capital into inventory at a time. They invest more like 6 weeks. Okay. Because why? Because it's a low MOQ order. It might be like 50 units per style per PO. And we turn it quickly, 2 weeks production, 3 weeks production, and then another 2 weeks to get it to them. Okay. So that we're shrinking the time it takes to get the supply over to demand, right? To the consumers. And in doing that, you go from 6 months of inventory to 6 weeks. Now you have a bunch more capital. It's not 50% of your capital in inventory, it's 10%, right? So now that 90% is available to you to invest in marketing, in branding, in researching fabrics, if that's what you want to do. The point is you get to invest in the company. So that's point one. Point two is that when you implement an agile supply chain successfully, to Ye's point, what you can do is you can test what works, what doesn't work. You can test that quickly, and you can chase the things that do work while staying out of the things that don't work, right? So now tying that point back to the first point about capital, our brands do occasionally make merchandising mistakes where they thought this style would be great or that they thought this colorway would be great, and it's not. But the difference is that in our model, those mistakes aren't anywhere near as expensive because we only invested 6 weeks and not 6 months. And so one of our brands.
Hey, Paul, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Sorry to interrupt. So what happens if you're importing? 6 weeks isn't enough time, and you're probably not going to meet the MOQs, and you're probably going to have to make things in the US or close to it to hit those smaller minimums and 6 week lead times. Do you agree with that?
Well, essentially our entire factory network is in Asia, and we still pull that off. And we're doing two things differently there. Mainly on the production side, what we're doing differently is we don't use the line labor model where you have 50, 60 workers and one of them passes the next thing to the next guy. And those line model factories, they need somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 units to reach peak efficiency, right?
Yeah.
Our factories use a pod labor model of sewers in groups of 5 or 6, and they work in a cycle. And because the group is so much smaller and they work in a cycle, the units necessary, the MOQ necessary to hit peak efficiency is far lower. So that's difference one. And then the second difference is that we can ship to the brand on ocean freight. But what we do more typically is we use third-party consolidators like UniExpress, SF Express. And I'm happy to get more into the details of why this is possible, but basically it's a deeply discounted air freight service, basically.
Yeah.
So that's how we pull off the 2-week transport lead time.
Okay.
Which allows, of course, at the end of the day to also think about where you are, what your margins are, right? And this is obviously if you start going into more of a air freights and so forth, you potentially might be jeopardizing some points on your margin. But if you are at the end of the day not tying in your cash and actually can turn that inventory more quicker throughout the season and chase your best sellers, you actually end up winning overall, even though you might be potentially giving up a point or so in margin. And that's the other thing that puts me into really conversation here to think about, as well as one of the things that we want to think about when we are setting up our goals, is where the missed margin opportunities, right? So if our growth goals didn't really distinguish between our high margin versus our low margin areas, you might be hitting sales numbers, but your profitability might quietly erode. And so those are the things to also thinking about. How do we tier and scale to identify which of the portion of our assortment would potentially transfer to this agile manufacturing, as an example, model, while some of the portion of our business stays on our traditional push model because we can really maximize the margins. But as long as we know that that product is a low risk, inventory commitment, because we know that's our heart of our brand and everybody always comes back and buys that product, yes, in that case, doing that investment up front in a bigger quantity to get even bigger margin makes sense. But when we are at this, especially in the trial phases or trying to figure it out, new categories that you're trying to introduce or grow, this is an opportunity where going the push model might not be the right way, right? So thinking about what your actual goals for next year are and how that ties in into your process is where it becomes very critical. And then, at that moment, I really want us to now think about what would be the right way of setting up the goals in 2026 to help us to ensure that we're not only growing, but we're also continuing to become more and more profitable on the bottom line. And one of the first things I'd love to just think about is the couple of key points that we often look at with our clients. Is one of them is the revenue goal that's tied into the real demand. So instead of us looking at, hey, we want to grow overall 20%, we're looking at it that we want to grow 20% with our top SKUs that deliver 60% plus contribution margin, as an example. And at the same time, we want to reduce our low velocity SKUs by 15%. So this allows us to create that balance of where we want to focus versus what we want to actually eliminate. This is where the 80-20 rule becomes really, really important, right? Because 20% of your assortment most likely drives 80% of your revenue. And what we often see that once you start really diversifying and looking at your top performers versus low velocity SKUs, you tend to find out that there's a huge tail end of your assortment that you're spending resources, money, and time on developing, on putting it up and marketing, when you can just chop off that tail and really focus on what's driving to your actual profit, what drives you, gives you the highest contribution margin overall. Richard, I know that you guys are also kind of looking at overall, constantly figuring out what your balance is between your assortment, and you have some different styles and SKUs, and I know you guys not overly assorted, but how do you guys play and look, do you guys ever look on the contribution margin side from your perspective on your business, or do you just often just look at the overall performance matrix, like the gross margin as well as your sales?
Well, being kind of a young company, we our metrics may not always look as good. So what we do is we gauge our public awareness and our brand awareness. That's so important for what we're doing right now to win over the trust of people, especially online. There's a lot of scams out there and all that kind of stuff that can really impact our online sales. So what we really focus on is building brand recognition. The metrics, of course, are always important. Those are always an important thing, but for us, there's more than just the metrics. Um, there's a bigger piece to there's a bigger vision for the whole thing, and that's kind of how we gauge our progress is, how many people are visiting our site, how many people recognize us, what is our public, what kind of public image do we have, what like getting in the magazine, we use that as a gauge that people are seeing us, they're reaching out, they want to feature us and stuff, so yeah, the sales metrics are important, but there's more to it for us. So especially at such a young stage, right?
Right, because
As you grow and grow, then it just becomes more and more of an economics model, and but right now it's you kind of gotta uh, play it a little bit differently. So
right, because
that's
you're
what we've been
focusing
doing.
more on the marketing and growth awareness as your main KPI for this few years that you've been kind of early on at this stage of your business.
Yes, and so growing it, getting more awareness has been what's been really important to us, and then everything else kind of starts to follow. We were in this magazine, then we started getting more interview, more people reaching out about our business, more recognition, and then that kind of helps us when we go to approach a store in Denver
Right.
or wherever, because then they know we're not just somebody off the street that's trying to sell them something. They don't know who we are, and they don't want to get ripped off or something. But now there's 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 a lot of public information out there about us that brings a lot of legitimacy to the brand.
Makes sense.
So for us right now, we're in brand recognition mode and building up a brand image, and everything else is kind of following suit. So that's kind of how we've been approaching it.
Makes total sense. Makes total sense. But I think in this case, you can also apply the similar logic, even though if you're not applying this logic to the assortment, but you can also apply the same logic on terms of your marketing efforts, right? And which channels are actually bringing you that ROI, right? So that you will be able to refocus it for the next year, saying, okay, that we've done this play work, this in 2025. But now we have enough data to understand what actually ROIs for us and what do we do need to do more of versus trying to do more of everything, right? In terms of the marketing side. So,
Right.
and this also thinks about, kind of goes the plays back to also margin goals tied to the assortment discipline overall, right? If you're not maximizing your profits, on your SKU count, that expands your gross margin, return on investment potentially will drop. And the strong margin goals, if we think about when we set them, it's really thinking about how do we increase the gross margin return on investment by 15% in our top three categories while holding or reducing the total SKU count overall. And the only way we would know this, again, if we're looking at our assortment sales, or in your case, marketing, down to the channel level, down to the category level, down to the subclass level, for example, to understand what's actually our top 10, 20% that our drives are in what we want to do more of versus that tail end that we potentially want to chop off and then use that resources and money into going more deeper on the winning styles. And that kind of helps us to also define how we could be able to do a better job next year on, again, growing our profitability while are trying to grow our sales, not just doing everything across everywhere. Jeff, I know you're working on the AI model right now, but I'm assuming that it arrived from a deep level of industry experience as well. So, when you are worked with the brands before, do you see similar pitfalls and or potentially what are the other brands are doing that were more favorable in terms of setting up better goals for the following year to help drive the profitability up towards the bottom line?
Yeah, so I have over 30 years of experience in the apparel world. And for me, it's always been, working with the salespeople are intimate with their customers when estimating and projecting their sales. We didn't use a lot we still don't use a lot of analytics and things like that, just because, there's a handful of always really large accounts when you're working, and with different mark departments and things like that, and it's just working really closely with sales and making sure that you're getting the best estimations and feel for what they're developing, if that makes any sense.
It makes total sense, but would you agree that brands that can grow revenue are actually can still lose money if their inventory is not is inventory setting is not positioned correctly, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So
Right?
that's the other thing with inventory. And we have millions of dollars worth of inventory, and it's very hard to manage, especially in this atmosphere when retailers are cutting their orders, or duties are going, tariffs are going up. So it makes it that much more challenging. But it's it's again, it's a business sense of how much inventory you're going to, bring in. And, analytics do help, obviously, but a lot of it is that gut feeling, especially when you own a company, is this a good risk or isn't it a good risk? if that makes
You're
sense.
right. You're right. And this is why we try to always go back to how do we position our inventory in terms of turn, aging, and then the buying discipline, not just based on units. And of course,
Yes.
how then you do tie it in with the agile manufacturing, right? With the agile speed to market, which you are doing with your AI of the print and demand factor, as well as what Paul is doing on the cut and sew side. So, I mean, there are solutions that helps you to do two things as we're starting to think. And if you are positioning your goals around inventory, is to think about in more on a deeper level in terms of how do we increase annual inventory turn, for example, from let's say 2.5 to 3.3.5 or 3.2, right? Or while reducing units on hand for 60 days plus by 25%, meaning so how do we have less inventory that sits longer in our shelves while we are able to at the same time increase our inventory turn? So it's a two-sided side of a table. So it's not just thinking about how do we sell faster, how do we sell more, which will tie more specifically to marketing, but really thinking how do we tie that to the process? And in this case, how do we tie this to our manufacturing process so that we could be able to turn that into more agile format?
Right.
The other thing, right? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say one of the things that makes it even more difficult is, the margin for the retailers. When you're working with a Target or a Walmart or these big retailers, you have to make things in large quantities. You have to, take risks, especially if they're not giving you guaranteed orders and bringing that stuff in. So that's another problem when it comes to figuring out how much you need to bring in if you're working with those kind of customers.
Correct. And this is where we always often say, do even with the big, large client, I mean, large retailer stores, don't, especially if you're a brand new store, right? If you're a brand new brand for them, actually push them towards more testing and figure out how to test first so that you can identify what are you going to be key drivers so that you can then invest in larger inventory with less of a risk. And honestly, buyers in will be appreciative if you are going to come with that model versus trying and say, hey, do a big buy initially. And then if they get stuck with that inventory, to your point, if they don't guarantee they're going to charge it back to you, and then you're going to go out of business. But if you were able to negotiate it correctly, then they'll be stuck and then they'll never buy it from you again. So again, tying it up to what your goal really is. And then I also often say, don't approach big box stores until you're fully ready, until you actually tested your market and you know what's going to be a moving drivers that you are going to be able to invest with more or less of a risk. But even for those big box stores, you often having an agile manufacturing also is a big plus because it allows them to then reorder within the same season without you actually carrying all of that product in stock. And they do appreciate that when you are bringing them that agile manufacturing capabilities as part of your brand value. And I know, Richard, you guys are trying to work with a lot of stores, so that to think about that, how that could potentially tie up to your story for the next year as you are trying to grow and give yourself more opportunities to open up more of those stores. The other thing I want us to kind of think about is the KPI driven processes optimization. So, how do our KPIs actually affect the processes? Because often when we think about KPIs, we're really thinking about the straightforward KPIs are numbers and it ties up to sales and it ties up to marketing. It's really seldom that our brands or executives that we work with say, okay, well, yes, we have this a particular KPI and it actually ties up directly to the different processes. Can anyone actually think about a KPI that potentially ties directly to a certain process that could be optimized? Leighton, I want to give you a chance to also share your knowledge as well. That I think that comes right into your alley as well. This question.
Yeah, well, for me, it's a little different because, I don't have inventory. I just offer, a service.
Mhm.
But I do, I have my metrics and like JT, I'm a speaker too. So really for me, it's the speaking, it's the one-on-one clients, and I have like a monthly membership, right? So those are kind of like my three streams. And yeah, I mean, I just look at how much I want to make and is it this many one-on-one clients? Is it that much speaking, and playing around with that. So, I've upped my speaking rates because that's kind of easier and quicker for me. And I still have a full time job. So for me, I'm in a little different place because I don't have as much time to devote fully to the business.
Mm-hmm.
But for it to make money, I have to still be doing certain things. And for me, what I've landed on is right now I focus mostly on the speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And if the one-on-one clients come, that's great, but that's not as consistent and steady as I know I'm getting paid a certain amount when I go speak at this
Right.
law firm to their women's group or whatever it is, right? So
Right.
that's like for me, it's more of like a time issue.
Got
So
it.
I'm in a little bit of a different boat, I think, than
No,
most people, but
no worries. Thank you so much for sharing that. And GT, what about you? Do you guys have any kind of matrix that you're tying in directly to the process? Okay, well, JT, can you hear us? I'll give him a little bit, maybe he had to step away.
Yes, I can hear you. Repeat that question.
Oh, yes. So I was curious if on your end you're tying in any
Oh
kind of
dear. Wait, hold on. What did I do? Why is everybody muted? What are we doing? Can you hear me?
we can hear you.
So why are you muted?
I
Oh
don't
dear.
know.
What did I hit? I hit a wrong button. Oh,
No worries.
okay, there we go. So repeat the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I was wondering if what you guys are doing on your end in terms of KPIs that are potentially tying in directly to the process.
I think honestly for me, I heard Liam's answer. For me, it's very different. For me, I've worked in my career, many of the organizations I've worked for have not had the proper KPIs that really related to what I did. I will say I am probably I like to say well, no, I am the pioneer when it comes to digital styling. Before everybody decided they wanted to do all these AI styles and things of that nature in 2015, I actually pioneered digital styling via a company called Famous Partners, which was a direct to consumer e-commerce made to order. Before sustainability was a fad, I helped pioneer this with that particular company. And some of the KPIs that we set, I wanted to go deeper than just a traditional retail model, which is normally 3.2 items per sale. To me, I think that's a big you can't really do that anymore. And to be able to look at your same store or your year over year growth or your same store sales year over year, you really can't take that approach anymore because consumer behavior is so unpredictable as we move forward in the digital age. So for me, processes that I took in was really looking at what we did versus looking at Google. We use a lot of Google algorithms because we created a collection every fortnight. So that's literally every 2 weeks we were turning out a new collection visually. Doesn't mean it all sales, but we were able to visually churn that out. So what I did for the process was what were our inquiries? What were they looking like from a geographical perspective? And then what did those look like from a sales as well as a returns perspective? So from there, I was able to make monthly, quarterly, and semi-annually KPIs for my sales teams because I was able to look at that activity and how that activity related in present day versus looking at historical data, which is most KPIs are based on historical data. And again, we are more or less in a digital age where everything is very
Mm-hmm.
present day. We need to use fresh information and not so much what, as we've lived through the pandemic age, unprecedented events can happen, which will skew your historical data. So instead of relying on what happened 365 days ago, I would look at the process that I've used is I'll look at what happened 120 days ago versus
Mm-hmm.
365. So if I think moving forward for any retailer, for any brand, yes, it's great to have the historical data and have those comparisons, but then you have to also look at that and then make those realistic goals based upon what's happening currently. So I would say that would be the processes that I've definitely have used throughout my career and will probably continue to use because this is where we are now.
I love it. I really love what you just mentioned, and this is often what we talk about in our majority of our roundtables. Is you're absolutely right to think about how did we also pull the data that's closer to your current seasons, that closer to your current trends, so that you could be able to react to it much quicker versus waiting for the season to pass and then evaluate. Love that you brought that together. And one of the things I want to share with you guys is to really about thinking about those KPIs that we've just earlier talked about and how they really tie into a process itself. So as an example, like low gross margin, return on investment, for example, KPI, that allows us, I mean, in KPI for us to grow it, what that can also helps us to identify that your assortment breadth potentially is too wide, right? That's too many SKUs means you're diluting your buys, you're weakening your depth, and you also slowing your turns. So if your KPI is to increase your GMRI, then in your idea for next year, then thinking about how do we scale, for example, and look at our assortment from a process assortment itself from a different perspective, and how do we identify, where do we want to focus on and which categories we want to focus on, and how do we equip our teams to be able to identify that within the season or as they are going through the seasonal buys, and be able to also react to it quickly, that as they are starting to identify those winners within the season after the testing phase, as an example. For sell-through, for example, if your goal is for next year to increase your sell-through rate, that potentially ties directly to whether you are to the rhythm of the read and react, right? And whether that's too slow. Weekly performance reviews and rapid decision loops are potentially missing. And this is where we are not reacting quickly enough to be able to turn or go back and get more product that is actually selling well throughout within the season, and be able to have enough time to actually put it on the floor. So this is where the root cause often happens, is that it doesn't have the visibility is not there, or potentially your teams are not trained, or your merchants are not trained to read it correctly or understand it. And this is where the decisions to often tied up in hierarchies, and it takes really long time to make a pivotal decision change versus giving that authority to your merchants and your buyers to be able to react quicker and be able to actually increase your sell-throughs, and as well as increase your turns. If you're noticing that this year you have a long lead times, and your KPI is trying to get your lead times more efficient next year, then potentially you might be are too heavy in your push production versus pull production, setup. And this is where the agility comes in, right? Moving to a hybrid model, to where your core products potentially might stay on push, but your trend products go on pull. This is potentially a good way of, again, tying that KPI of increasing those lead times. I'm sorry, decreasing those lead times, but eventually allowing you to also be able to increase your revenue and be able to turn, especially the well received and well responded product. So that's another thing to think about. And here I often also think about is looking at consistency of lead times, because what we often also see is that we focus on a overall lead time from a vendor A or B or C. We know that, let's say, for example, it's a 30-day lead time. But what we often don't track or see is the inconsistency. So if you 80% of the time your lead times were delivered on time within that 30-day frame, but if 20% of those were inconsistent by 2-3 weeks, sometimes at the time where they were delayed, well, that becomes a problem, because that brings in a full set of missed launches, of missed timing to where you had the highest opportunity to sell. So thinking about those aspects as well, if you're currently not tracking the how consistent your lead times are, that is potentially could be another pitfall where you might be able to look and fine tune your actual process. High performance variance is another one that's a big KPI that often we're looking at, and thinking about your testing process and whether it's weak or strong, right? So if you have too much of variance in your performance, most likely your testing process is very weak, where you actually guys are going into straight into bulks, you're going straight into big commitments. And we found really controlled tests, or doing those tests early enough for pre-season or in beginning of the seasons, you can really accurately forecast which styles you will need to scale. So thinking about how do you create a process for a controlled test of your assortment could be another great way of reducing that performance variance in 2026. And low forecast accuracy, which is often comes in with younger brands, especially who don't have a lot of data to rely on, and often they are forecasting on their gut feeling. Then your planning cycle really needs to be potentially redesigned altogether, or potentially designed if you have not even designed it in the first place, where you're making the decisions based on emotion or the outdated data patterns versus making the decision on real-time trends and information that you're receiving from your customers, from you're receiving from your stores, and be able to again both go back and react to it quicker, which will only happen if you have a agile manufacturing setup, which is again goes back to that root cause, right? So this is how some of our KPIs that we create often ties very tightly with the processes that we potentially need to either design or redesign or optimize in order for us to succeed in back in 2026. What other kind of KPIs, and then this is a question back to the group. What are the type of KPIs that you guys are thinking of focusing on in 2026 for your own businesses? So hopefully we could be able to spark up some ideas of what our other people who are going to be listening to this call later on can be able to think about what type of KPIs they should also consider for their business. Richard, what are your primary KPIs for next year that you are working on?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm having a
what are
lot of
your
computer
KPI
problems.
what are your KPIs that you're planning to focus for your business next year?
Well, we would like to get our cost basis down for a lot of our production right now. Since we're not ordering a lot, the overall cost is pretty high. Talked to a couple different manufacturers, they can lower it quite a bit. But we want to keep the quality. So right now that's what we're working on for next year, is getting the overall cost of production down, because that makes it really more difficult to then try to either sell it through a boutique who they have their own margins that you have to take into account and all that kind of stuff. That makes it a little bit more challenging um, when we have such a high production cost. So right now that's what we're focusing on, is lowering the cost. And we have some leads, some good leads out of Peru, actually. Great place to make jeans from what we've heard on prior roundtables. So that's where we are now. And yeah, lowering the cost is the big push that we're doing right now.
And Richard, highly recommend you to work with Paul as well. I think that might be an opportunity for you guys as well. Jeff,
Absolutely.
What about you guys?
So we haven't launched yet, so my new company. But typical KPIs, return on investment is huge, obviously, and you've been talking about it all day, pretty much. But that's probably the biggest one.
Your return on investment from your perspective as you guys are
For
launching
each product.
for each of your products. It makes total sense. Paul, what about you guys?
So for us, on agile supply chains, one of the things that I'll mention three metrics. When a brand first transitions from old school to agile supply chains, we really watch the sales trend just to see how that transition's working out for them. And that's like one of the core value props, right? So we look at that. Now, once they're in agile supply chain, there's two things that we focus on a lot. One is the sell-through rate, right? Because we want to be able to see, okay, these are the ones that are not selling right now, so let's just stop there. And here's the ones that are doing really well, so let's chase those. And then later on, you perhaps say, if we're going to rationalize the assortment to cut out the stuff that's not working and just permanently deprecate it, then you go to those low sell-through styles or colorways. So that's two. And then the third thing we look at is the full price selling rate. And this is one of our main value props, is like, okay, old school supply chain, you overproduce as a matter of practice, right? So now if you're going to overproduce because you see overproduction as a smaller risk than underproduction and missing a sale, if you're always overproducing, eventually you have to mark it down. You have to mark it down, or you say, shoot, I really have to get this out of the warehouse. It's not selling. I'm just going to take a deep, deep loss on those specific units, right? In our model, since we're saying you don't have to do that anymore, one of the things that we watch is the full selling rate. So for us, a brand should go from a full price selling rate of, say, 70% to, for us, mid to high 90s. And that's like one of the things that we watch to say, see here, look, it's working. And also it's benefiting the financial health of the brand massively. So those are our three things. It was watching the sales trend, number one, number two, sell-through rate, and number three, full price selling rate.
Makes total sense. And I just want to add to couple more others that I think are going to be very critical to think about just for overall, as you know, for fashion brands and retail brands that are listening to us, is thinking about how do we really make it more adaptation KPIs, looking at so that we could be able to be proactive and adopting some of these KPIs in the real time. One of them would be, for example, shorter planning cycles, right? Thinking about 90-day tactical cycles, monthly business reviews with data-driven adjustments as an example, category level pulse check every 2 to 3 weeks, micro adjustments instead of large course corrections. I mean, those are the things can help us to be more adaptive, and be able to, by shortening those cycles, can help us to adjust our buys faster, helps us to respond to early sell-through patterns. It helps us to shift our open to buy funds between the categories quickly. It helps us to optimize margins before the season ends. And it really helps us to control aging inventory before it becomes liable. The other one is scenario planning, which often, and I would say literally 95% of the time, it's completely missed by a lot of the clients who come to us, where they don't, they plan just rigorous KPIs, where instead of planning also what is going to be the best case scenario, worst case scenario, and mid case scenario, so that they will be able to react quickly depending on where they land, right?
I want a copy.
Go ahead, later. Sorry, I missed somebody said something. I don't want to. Okay, maybe it was a mistake. And so base case scenario really goes about, what you do if the demand spikes, right? The channel grows faster or category outperforms. In the worst case scenario, think about what you'll cut. What are the delays, if the delays happens, or if they restructure, or how you restructure it if the demand softens, or if your supply chain conditions tightens, right? And then for mid-case scenario, for example, you think about your baseline operational plan. So which helps you to then protect your margin. It helps you to think inventory investment, improve your inventory investment, lead time strategies improvement, working capital improvement, and of course, supplier relationship improvement overall. And test and learn assortment is another one that I think is going to be super important to think about in 2026, especially with the way that our industry is going and trending, thinking about the micro batches, how do we do small runs, 25 to 200 units as an examples, with validated demand before committing to deeper buys. And Richard, that's right up your alley right there, right? Thinking about how do we test SKUs, styles, intentionally launches with controlled depth, really in learning earlier behavior of your customers' response. And you could do that either through pre-orders, you could do that through short-term launches, soft launch. I mean, there's so many different ways of doing it, but that also helps for you to be able to overall test quickly and make better form decisions to minimize at the end of the day your risk, because you're minimizing your risk in any time when there's a high learning environment. And I kind of want us to wrap it up, because I know we're right at the top of our hour, with just that thought of how do we set ourselves for success the next year to be able to set a smart KPIs and tie them back to the processes that we want to improve, right? Versus just focusing on a pure number, which is sales, or pure number of improving margins, as an example. Thinking about your diversifying sourcing, thinking about the ever-changing landscape, and which we have faced in 2025 with tariffs, to thinking about how do you, are you diversified enough so that you could be able to quickly pivot from factory to factory or region to region, depending on what happens economically in the world overall. And thinking about real-time ability to respond and have feedback loops that you could be able to respond to within the season and not wait till the next quarterly review to see whether you are dipping or you're actually meeting your KPIs or not. With that, I'd love to thank everyone again for this hour, for being with us. We're going to continue talking on this topic and really diving in more depth in our live event that's going to be happening that happens every third Thursday of the month. It is going to be broadcasted live as well, so please do look at our Yay Designs LinkedIn page that will have all of our events and as well as new topics that we're going to be discussing. I really look forward to see everyone. If you guys are listening to this as a replay and you feel like there was lots of value to it, please do share, like, give us comments so that we know that this content works really well and brings you value so we could do more of it and be able to continue delivering value, high value content next year as well, to be able to help you grow your businesses, whether you are in manufacturing or in the retail space. Look forward to see you guys all next time. And thank you again, once again, for everyone who joined us today. Just any last minute thoughts before we all drop off? Anybody?
Yeah, I was just going to add in about we were talking about the customer's reaction, and that was one thing that we've noticed. We get a huge amount of positive reaction from people that they love what we're doing. But then there's a disconnect between the loving what we're doing and then the purchasing of the jeans. And so we find we got all this great feedback. People love what we're doing. And then the missing variable that we are trying to find is turning that extreme level of enthusiasm into a purchase or a lot of purchases, not just
Right.
not enough but a steady stream of purchases. And that's what we've noticed has been the missing variable that's been very hard to crack.
It is a hard to crack variable, but it goes back to the value proposition of your product to the consumer, right? So, of course, it sounds like you guys doing a good job on getting people emotionally connected to your story and emotionally connected to your brand. But if they don't see the value proposition in your actual product, that might be where the disconnect happens. And that could be based on maybe not communicating well enough the features of your product and why it's important, because you're leading so much more with the story of why you created the brand, and or potentially thinking through about, again, if depending on how you're trying to sell it, whether you're doing it through pitches and decks to the buyers at the retail stores locations versus if you're doing it on e-commerce. There's different strategies for conversion, but thinking about, what are those materials look like, what are your pitch looks like, what is your product pages look like, for example. Do they give enough value or communicate enough features for the customer to say, yes, I want this product and this product is for me, after they fell in love with your story?
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Richard, for sharing that. I hope I see you in the next roundtable. Anybody else would like to give any last minute thoughts? All right.
I would say,
Yeah, go ahead.
based on what I've observed for Black Friday, especially because I feel like that should be something that I think brands and retailers definitely need to adjust to ASAPable, because I see that trend going, is people are buying less but at a higher price point. So if you're at a point, especially if you're anywhere early stage, please adjust your margins, and please adjust your sales expectations, because I know on average, because I have a background in retail operations as well, it used to be 3.2 per sale. That definitely needs to be adjusted down to anywhere between 1.8 and 2.4 items per sale, because people are paying a higher price point for fewer items. So I would say, if you're going to have a KPI going into 2026, it is adjust your margins to meet this new consumer behavior that we're stepping into, which is fewer items. So even though I'm glad that consumption is down, I know that will hurt a lot of brands, but it's time to adjust so you don't feel that hurt.
Agree, 100% agreed. And this is where we want to make sure you're not over assorted, right? Give only and choices, not or choices, because that also declines the customer to buy more. As well as to your point, what you've brought up, and it's important to adjust your margins, important to adjust your pricing, but also still staying within the competitive landscape. So don't get too caught up in terms of, hey, everybody's increasing prices, everything is going higher. You have to also still understand who your customer is, and at the end of the day, what their spend velocity is and what their comfort zone is and where they would want to spend. Easily, and structuring your assortment on good, better, and best is where that becomes a critical strategy in terms of how you're planning your assortment, so that you can compensate for some of those adjustments, as well as be able to structure your assortment in the way it's methodical, so that when the customer lands on your e-commerce pages or in your stores, on your brand, so that they could be able to understand the assortment and be able to have an easier purchasing decision than harder. That was a great insight. I'm glad that you added, and thank you so much. Anybody else have any other last minute thoughts before we drop off? Great, perfect. Thank you guys, everybody, so much. I'm really excited. I hope to see everybody. Leighton, I hope to see you next roundtable as well. Paul, always a pleasure. Richard, I'll see you next time. JT, hopefully I see you next roundtable as well. Thank you and welcome, everybody.
Thank you.